can I just say to the House, I expect moderate and temperate language. As we come to the statement, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will make a statement. I'm grateful to Sue Gray for her report today, and I want to thank her for the work that she's done. I also thank the Metropolitan Police for completing their investigation, and I want to begin today by renewing my apology to the House, to the whole country, for the short lunchtime gathering on the 19th of June 2020 in the Cabinet Room, during which I stood at my place at the Cabinet table and for which I received a fixed penalty notice. And I also want to say, Mr. Speaker, above all, that I take full responsibility for everything that took place on my watch. Sue Gray's report has emphasised that it is up to the political leadership in Number 10 to take ultimate responsibility, and of course I do. But since these investigations have now come to an end, this is my first opportunity to set out some of the context and to explain both my understanding of what happened and also to explain what I have previously said to this House. And it's important to set out that over a period of about 600 days, gatherings on a total of 8 dates have been found to be in breach of the regulations in a building that is 5,300 metres square across 5 floors, excluding the flats. Mr. Speaker, I do think it is important because this is the first time I've had a chance I've had to set out the context. Hundreds of staff are entitled to work, and in the Cabinet Office, which has thousands of officials and now is the biggest it's been in any point in its 100-year history. And that is in itself one of the reasons why the government is now looking for change and reform. Mr. Speaker, those staff working in Downing Street were permitted to continue attending their office for the purpose of work, and the exemption under the regulations applied to their work because of the nature of their jobs reporting directly to the Prime Minister. These people were working extremely long hours, doing their best to give this country the ability to fight the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that this is no mitigation, but it is important to set out
Prime
the
Minister,
context.
please, just one second. Can I just appeal to the House? I expect it to be heard, and I want everybody to hear it. And I want the same respect to be shown to the Leader of the Opposition afterwards. So please, this is a very, very important statement that the country wants to hear as well. Prime Minister.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I'm trying to set out the context, not to mitigate or to absolve myself in any way. The exemption under which they were present in Downing Street includes those circumstances where officials and advisers were leaving the government. And it was appropriate to recognise them, to thank them for the work that they have done. Let me come to that, Mr. Speaker. I briefly attended such gatherings to thank them for their service, which I believe is one of the essential duties of leadership, and particularly important when people need to feel that their contributions have been appreciated and to keep morale as high as possible. I'm trying to explain the reasons I was there, Mr. Speaker. And it's clear from what Sue Gray has had to say that some of these gatherings then went on far longer than was necessary. And they were clearly in breach of the rules, and they fell foul of the rules. I have to tell the House, because the House will need to know this, and again, this is not to mitigate or to extenuate, I had no knowledge of those subsequent proceedings because I simply wasn't there. And I have been as surprised and disappointed as anyone else in this House as the revelations have unfolded. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, I have been appalled by some of the behaviour, particularly in the treatment of the security and the cleaning staff. And I would like to apologise to those members of staff. And I expect anyone who behaved in that way to apologise to them as well. And I'm happy to set on the record now that when I said, and I came to this House and said in all sincerity that the rules and guidance had been followed at all times, it was what I believed to be true. It was certainly the case when I was present at gatherings to wish staff farewell, and the House will note that my attendance at these moments, brief as it was, has not been found to be outside the rules. But clearly this was not the case for some of those gatherings after I had left, and at other gatherings when I was not even in the building. So I would like to correct the record, to take this opportunity, not in any sense to absolve myself of responsibility, which I take and have always taken, but simply to explain why I spoke as I did in this House. Mr. Speaker, in response to her interim report, Sue Gray acknowledges that very significant changes have already been enacted. She writes, and I quote, "I am pleased that progress is being made in addressing the issues I raised." And she adds, "Since my update, there have been changes to the organisation and management of Downing Street in the Cabinet Office with the aim of creating clearer lines of leadership and accountability, and now these need the chance and time to bed in." Number 10 now has its own permanent secretary charged with applying the highest standards of governance. There are now easier ways for staff to voice any worries, and Sue Gray welcomes that, and I quote, "Steps have since been taken to introduce more easily accessible means by which to raise concerns electronically, in person or online, including directly with the permanent secretary." The entire senior management has changed. There is a new chief of staff, an elected member of this House, who also commands the status of a cabinet minister. There is a new director of communications, a new principal private secretary, and another of other key appointments in my office. I am confident with the changes and new structures that are now in place, that we are humbled by the experience, and we have learned our lesson. And I want to conclude by saying that Mr. Speaker, I am humbled and I have learned a lesson, Mr. Speaker. And I want to conclude by saying that whatever the failings of we'll come to that. And whatever the failings of Number 10 and the Cabinet Office throughout this very difficult period, and my own, for which I take full responsibility, I continue to believe that the civil servants and advisers in question, hundreds of them, thousands of them, some of whom, Mr. Speaker, are the very people who've received fines, are good, hard-working people, motivated by the highest calling to do the very best for our country. And I will always be proud of what they achieved, including procuring essential life-saving PPE, creating the biggest testing programme in Europe, and helping to enable the development and distribution of the vaccine which got this country through the worst pandemic of a century. And now, Mr. Speaker, we must get our country through the aftershocks of COVID with every ounce of ingenuity and compassion and hard work. So I hope that today, as well as learning the lessons from Sue Gray's report, which I'm glad I commissioned, and again, I repeat I'm grateful to her. And I hope very much that now that she has reported, we will be able to move on and focus on the priorities of the British people, standing firm against Russian aggression, easing the hardship caused by the rising costs that people are facing, fulfilling our pledges to generate a high-wage, high-skill, high-employment economy that will unite and level up across the whole of our United Kingdom. That is my mission, that is our mission, that is the mission of the whole of the government, and we will work day and night to deliver it, and I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The door of number 10 Downing Street is one of the great symbols of our democracy. Those who live behind it exercise great power, but they do so knowing their stay is temporary. Long after they've gone, that door and the democracy it represents will remain firm and unyielding. But Britain's constitution is fragile. It relies on members of this House and the custodians of Number 10 behaving responsibly, honestly, and in the interests of the British people. When our leaders fall short of these standards, this House has to act. For months, members opposite have asked the country to wait. First, for the police investigation, which concluded that this Prime Minister is the first in our country's history to have broken the law in office. Then they asked the country to wait for the Sue Gray report. They need wait no longer. That report lays bare the rot that under this Prime Minister has spread in Number 10, and it provides definitive proof of how those within the building treated the sacrifices of the British people with utter contempt. When the dust settles and the anger subsides, this report will stand as a monument to the hubris and the arrogance of a government that believed it was one rule for them and another rule for everyone else. The details are stark. 5 months ago, the Prime Minister told this House all guidance was completely followed in Number 10. Yet we now know he attended events on the 17th of December. At least one of those attending has received a fine for it, deeming it illegal. We know that on the 18th of December an event was held in which staff drank excessively, which others in the building described as a party, and that cleaners were left to mop up the red wine the next day. On the 20th of May, as a COVID press conference was taking place, one of his senior officials was told, "Be mindful, cameras are leaving, don't walk about waving bottles." It is now impossible to defend the Prime Minister's words to this House. This is about trust. Because during that May 20 press conference, the British public were told normal life as we know it is a long way off. But that wasn't the case in Number 10. Even now, after 126 fines, they think it's everyone else's fault but theirs. They expect others to take the blame whilst they cling on. They pretend that the Prime Minister has somehow been exonerated, as if the fact that he only broke the law once is worthy of praise. The truth is, they set the bar for his conduct lower than a snake's belly. And now they expect the rest of us to congratulate him as he stumbles over it. Number 10 symbolises the principles of public life in this country: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, leadership. But who could read this report and honestly believe the Prime Minister has upheld those standards? The reason the British public have had to endure this farce was his refusal to admit the truth or do the decent thing when he was found to have broken the law. This report was necessary because of what Sue Gray describes as failures of leadership and judgment for which senior political leadership must bear responsibility. It is that failure of leadership that has now left his government paralysed in the middle of a cost of living crisis. The government has turned the focus of his government to saving his own skin. It's utterly shameful. It is precisely because he cannot lead that it falls to others to do so. I've been clear what leadership looks like. I haven't broken any rules, and any attempt to compel...
Sorry. Can I just calm it down? Quite rightly, I wanted to the Prime Minister. I expect the same of the Leader of the Opposition. Now, those who don't wish to hear, please, go and have a cup of tea or something. Yes, Starmer.
I've been clear what leadership looks like. I haven't broken any rules, and any attempt to compare a perfectly legal takeaway while working to this catalogue of criminality looks even more ridiculous today. But, Mr. Speaker, if the police decide otherwise, I will do the decent thing and step down. The public need to know that not all politicians are the same. That not all politicians put themselves above their country. That honesty, integrity and accountability matter. Members on the opposite benches now also need to show leadership. This Prime Minister is steering the country in the wrong direction. They can hide in the backseat, eyes covered, praying for a miracle, or they can act. Stop this out-of-touch, out-of-control Prime Minister from driving Britain towards disaster. We waited for the Sue Gray report. The country can't wait any longer. The values symbolised by the door of number 10 must be restored. Members opposite must finally do their bit. They must tell the current inhabitant, their leader, that this has gone on too long. The game is up. You cannot be a lawmaker and a lawbreaker. And it's time to pack his bags. Only then can the government function again. Only then can the rot be carved out. Only then can we restore the dignity of that great office and the democracy that it represents.